story comes to us from Effective Fix 3235. Never piss off a rich redneck. This is a story about my grandparents' friend. I was a young teen, but given the outcome, this story has stuck with me. I've sat on this story for a while, but it's so satisfying to see a gaggle of Karens taken down a notch that I figured I'd share. For the sake of this story, we will call my grandparents' friend William. Now, my grandparents knew William from way back. My grandmother knew him from school, and my grandfather met him after marrying my grandmother. Anyways, in the 60s, Grandma was a manager at the 7-Eleven. William led a crew that went there every day. It was the only gas station in a 30-minute radius, so everyone knew everyone in that sleepy coastal town kind of way. Now, one day, William was doing a job down on the waterfront and slipped, fell, and broke his back. While he was healing from the operation and was broke as a joke, my grandma would always make sure to send him something to eat that she'd pay for when the crew would come in to grab their snacks and gas up, knowing William would simply skip the meal to save money for his own family. My grandpa also took him to several doctor's appointments since William couldn't drive for a while, and his tiny little wife couldn't wrangle him into a car by herself. William never forgot that. 20 years later, when he sold off his now very successful business and was a millionaire about 20 times over, he promptly told 90% of the world to go to hell, but kept those that had always been there for him close. Meanwhile, he never moved from the house that he'd had since before he was rich. His only concessions to his wealth were trips with his wife to see the world and buying up quite a few acres of the forested land around him. If you weren't his friend, you'd take him for every other blue-collar worker in the town. There was absolutely nothing obvious to show that he was worth tens of millions of dollars. After his wife died in the 90s, William decided to take up a new hobby. As he lived outside of the city limits, he set up a sawmill and woodworking shop, got all the proper permits and everything. The saws were in a big old enclosed building in the middle of all that land. So in all honesty, no harm, no foul, right? Wrong. The family that owned the forest behind William's land had just sold it to developers. Thus, the new luxury gated neighborhood, the first in the area, was born. Enter a plethora of Chads and Karens who were mostly from up north and had moved down south to take advantage of the better weather and the nearby beach. It didn't take long before they decided to take offense to his little business venture on the other side of the 10-foot wall of their neighborhood because it didn't fit within the image of their community. You know, the community he was decidedly not a part of. So they sued him. Didn't even try to start a dialogue with him, just up and sued him. William was livid. He was your typical coastal redneck, and he would be damned if those damn Yankees told him what to do on his own property that was not within city limits, nor located in an HOA. William countered with professional noise studies that showed that some of the kids in that neighborhood drove vehicles that made more ambient noise than his little operation. Nope, the people in the neighborhood simply threw more money at the lawyers to continue on with the lawsuit. Essentially, their plan was to bleed him dry. Their lawyers, who were not locals, actually told William's lawyers that he should probably advise his client to close the shop so that he wouldn't end up bankrupt due to the resources being thrown at him from the homeowners. Due to the relatively modest surroundings of his home, the neighbors nor their lawyers had any idea the man was actually richer than just about all of them put together. All they saw was an older dude who drove a beat-up 80s model truck and wore Dickies jeans and work shirts that lived in what appeared to be a relatively modest home, especially compared to their McMansions. When William's lawyer told him about that conversation, William lost his effing mind. I clearly remember his screeching into my parents' driveway in that old work truck, cussing up a storm and ranting and raving before he even got in the house. He came to our house. Why? Because my grandmother, bless her heart, was known as one of the most giving people in the world, unless you pissed her off. If you hurt her or someone she cared for, she became one of the most vindictive buttholes that could be found in that town. I am not kidding when I say that her ability for revenge served cold was legendary among the locals. So William had come to the house for a dose of her deviousness. Us kids weren't allowed inside during that conversation, but after he left that day, I later heard the adults talking about how he proceeded to hire quite a few private investigators to see if there would be any dirt to dig up on them. By them, I mean the dozens of people in that neighborhood that were a part of that lawsuit. Lo and behold, there was apparently copious amounts of dirt to be had. I still remember him positively crowing about it to my grandparents one fine summer day months later. That 60-something-year-old man was as gleeful as the proverbial kid on Christmas morning. Why? Because after he learned what his little private army dug up, he started making some phone calls to various acquaintances in high places. The ensuing fallout meant that the lawsuit was dropped. There was quite a list of misdeeds that were discovered, but the ones that I heard talked about by the adults that stick out are: there were more than a handful of individuals that owed back child support. William, very helpfully, had the private investigators provide the mothers updated addresses and employment information so that they could pursue said child support and garnishment if they wanted to. On top of that, the IRS became very interested in several of those people, as well as various other neighbors. Finally, one household ended up in prison because the investigators realized that they were illicit substance dealers. The pictures of the transactions caught by the PIs were helpfully handed over to the sheriff's department. Moral of the story: never piss off a rich redneck. OP added a really quick edit. It says, "Edit, thank you for all the love, fellow Redditors. I didn't expect all this when I logged back in this morning." Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Geared Down Son. It says, "I actually like this story. Why? Because it's actually believable. OP didn't know a lot of details, and the end didn't involve a ton of details the OP obviously wouldn't know, with a cherry on top like most submissions in here." Great story, OP. Comes to us from No Cheetah 1486. How I made my landlord and neighbor pay over $14,000 in fines for harassing me. This post was originally shared on malicious compliance, and I was told about this subreddit by about 20 people. I don't post much, but it seemed a better fit. First of all, before I start, I'm about 80% these two are involved with each other in a romantic way, but I can't confirm. Now, I'm not an expert writer, nor am I going to spend an extended period of time making sure everything is perfect. I did once or twice over, but there's just so much, a little frazzled by the situation. I've had difficulty putting my thoughts on paper since elementary. This doesn't mean I won't do my best. I'm sure there's run-on sentences and improper spelling. I don't think this is a prerequisite for sharing your experience. So I travel a lot and I live in an RV mostly full-time. I've stayed at the same park, however, for the last 9 months. I've had issues here. They have called the police on me for arguing, not joking. They will ignore me in the office, all because there was a small mistake on the paperwork when I stayed here on an overnight 9 months ago. Something happened and they tried to use that to kick me out. However, the owner said it didn't matter and all info is pulled from the registration. So blaming the paperwork for being off by 1 year on the RV as a cause for eviction was far-fetched. There was a few other incidents, but I just figured it's cheap here and I can pay my rent over the phone. Who cares? And don't really plan on going anywhere, as where I am, all the parks are full for snowbird season. Plus, I got a new job here. Anyways, we had a neighbor who was miserable. We could tell from day one. We also have 2 cats. They hang out on our porch mostly all the time. Occasionally they stray, but they're older and don't go far. So around 6 weeks ago, after 9 months of being my neighbor and never saying a word, he started acting very erratic, randomly approached my wife as she was washing the car outside and got in her face and started screaming, saying that he dug cat poop out of the dirt behind his 1979 bus on bricks. And now he was going to put traps out and poison. Somehow, management had heard the commotion, or he had told them to come, but they pulled up and quickly pulled him to the side to talk to him privately, refusing to even listen to us. We were very weirded out, calling him baby, sweetheart, etc. So they said, it's his space, he can trap all he wants. If your animals are going onto his property, then that's your fault. Now, this park is known to have so many cats, they keep feeders by the front office. I warned them that what they were doing was illegal, but they said, we've been doing this a long time. We know exactly what we're doing. Call animal control if you don't believe me. I said, okay, but he threatened to poison them. So I'm making a police report in case anything happens. I want him to be on record as having threatened them. They came, took the report, and oh man, did that make him mad. Still, at this point, I hadn't figured out how to get my revenge. Animal control said it was legal and didn't do anything. We immediately got the cats microchipped and went to Lowe's to buy cat traps to teach our cats what a trap is and how to not go into one. Easiest trick I've ever taught an animal. Took one try, now they're terrified of anything resembling a trap. We were stumped. The cats were going stir crazy. Then, 5 days later, she leaves a letter on my door, a self-help eviction, saying I have no choice but to leave immediately, and she was turning off the power on X day. I told her if she did, I would call the local police, as that's a self-help eviction, and you've already demonstrated malice by calling the police on me for asking you a question you don't like, assisting in the trapping of my cats while encouraging other cats to stay, self-help evicting, and at one point she refused my CDC declaration letter, and I have all these things recorded on video. On top of all this, she says he needs to start his Harley and let it run for 45 minutes to warm up, even if he's not riding. That's what Harleys need, 2 feet from my bedroom window, when he knows I work nights and I'm asleep. Essentially trying to force me out, saying my dummy camera isn't allowed, however, his real camera pointed at my space is. I was very prepared for an eviction threat, as these guys get away with so much, being that they can threaten eviction and people will just roll out in their RVs. Not me, no, not me. After the manager finally spoke to the owner, she realized she had dug herself into a hole and now couldn't evict me unless I had not paid rent, as they had refused to show me a contract or any rules the entire time I've been there. They don't like to have written rules, so they can change them as they need. The manager told me I was never allowed into the office unless to get mail, and I must pay rent over the phone with a card. Still though, I wasn't comfortable because my neighbor had now put out around 4 different traps, some as close as 1 foot from my property line. He still hadn't caught anything. So by chance, I ran into a property manager while out shopping for my own trap, and he told me some interesting things. I did a little research and found out that trapping in Nevada is illegal without a permit. Too many protected species. So I knew the cats would never go into a trap. We did about 5 sessions with them, and they got the point. When they even saw the trap, they just hide. So I told the landlord, it's fine, he can keep the traps. I had heard from a neighbor that he saw the manager opening up the storage room and loading his truck with animal traps, but he didn't know about our situation, so he was confused. This is when I put my plan together. I knew the longer he saw he wasn't getting his way, the more traps he would put out, and the more erratic he would become. He started revving his Harley for 45 minutes about 3 times a day while sitting inside with the radio on blasting. Then he'd get a chop saw and cut lumber into as small of pieces as he could, and then stand 10 feet back and launch them into a steel trailer. I had around 2 gigs of video from my cell phone, so I only actually caught about half of it. I knew he was losing it. I put a dummy camera facing his front door, and that's what did it. He got too close and pushed my wife on camera. I had successfully driven him nuts and had what I needed for a civil harassment suit, and I just let him stew. Every few days, I'd notice a new trap. Finally, when he got up to 14 traps, his tiny RV space looked like a landmine of cat traps. My cats were, and probably are still, traumatized from the sight. My next move was to call the Nevada Fish and Wildlife. I emailed the picture of the traps. They finally showed up today and found his 14 traps. The fine is $1,000 per trap. These people are also cops that don't get to ever bust anyone, so they took it very seriously. They confiscated his traps and hit the park with $14,000 in fines. Afterwards, she called me asking me why I would do that. I informed her I'm not done and that I'm building a case on her and her little friend for harassment. I've since been moved to one of the best spots on the property, near the $1 million RVs, next to the pool and hot tub, with a bar and pizza about a 200-foot walk. And yes, I begged for a new spot to end this from day one. But she said, we're booked up full all winter. We won't even have one spot until after Christmas. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Zero the Hero 89. It says, stay on your toes, friends. Congratulations are in order, but stay on your toes. OP responded to this one and said, thank you. We're officially moved all the way over to the new spot next week. It sounds easy to move in an RV, but when you've been stationary a while, there's a lot to pack. Also, forcing us into moving is an eviction in and of itself. We're just trying to be amicable by agreeing to the spot. Plus, I went to the new spot and they cooked us dinner. They had an adorable little girl. It was just that environment you crave after something like this. People who aren't miserable hermits.